This is my November fish room tour and my aquariums are coming along nicely. So starting with my 40-gallon tank, and I did lose a harlequin rasbora this month, but I do think it's because of natural causes. By the time that I noticed, my shrimp had already consumed the majority of the fish, so I couldn't check for any signs of infection, but the other harlequins in the tank seem healthy. I was worried about my Siamese Algae Eater as it managed to wedge itself between some of the lava rock in the tank. I'm guessing it might have been trying to reach some food pellets that the shrimp had dragged into there, but when I reached in to try and help it out, it must have sensed my hand approaching it and it managed to swim off on its own. It does have a small mark on its back and its behaviour changed for around a week, but thankfully it does seem to be getting back to normal now. My corydoras have been spawning again this month as well, and the females seem to be full of eggs again, so I am expecting another batch of eggs in the tank. The water lettuce has started to take over the aquarium now as well, so I do think I will be switching back to Salvinia in the future as it's a lot easier to manage. I moved my Echinodorus reni closer to the Echinodorus cordifolius in the tank to try and improve its growth, but again it's still struggling, so I think it's something specific to this variety of Echinodorus. I also moved the Ludwigia Mini Super Red to give it more light as well, and thankfully this plant does seem to be picking up and it has improved its growth rate over the last month. Moving on to my 8-gallon Betta fish tank, and things are going really well with this setup, and I'll be uploading a build video for the tank sometime this coming month. Marmalade has settled into her new tank now, and she does seem to have started to view the shrimp as tank mates and friends rather than food. She really is a curious little Betta fish, and she's always off exploring or digging around in her plants, and as you can see she managed to uproot some sterigani ribbons. One of the female yellow Neocaridina shrimp in here is carrying eggs now, so I'm expecting babies any day, but I will be curious to see if Marmalade decides to eat the tiny little shrimplets or not. The limnophila flora has started to show signs of nutrient deficiency, with some of the colour on the stems changing to the weird brown colour. I would guess that this is due to this being a low bio load tank because bettas really don't need much food, so I have started to dose liquid fertilizer, but if I can't return the plant to full health I'll just put rotala or hygrophila in here instead. The Monte Carlo is absolutely thriving in here, and it's the first time I've kept this plant, but so far I'm really impressed with its growth, even if Marmalade does like to wiggle around in it looking for food and uproot it once or twice a week. Just a quick update on my other 8-gallon tank, and I did have a chance to break it down and debuild everything that was in there after the Betta fish who lived in this tank passed away last month, but I have saved all of the plants for a rebuild. I am thinking of rebuilding this as a Walstad guppy tank using Sirius stone to maintain a higher pH level because I do have soft tap water. I also plan to try guppies from Gateshead Guppies as it's close to my house and their water is only slightly harder than mine, whereas the breeders in the south of England where I usually get my guppies have very hard water, so I do think that's part of my problem. So moving on to my other tanks, and all of the other tanks featured now are unheated, so I am curious how these perform over the coming months as we're getting into winter here, and I did try some plants in unheated tanks last winter and they did make it through without issue, but I'm trying a wider range of plants this winter. So my Medaka are finally in my 29-gallon tank after months of care, with them starting as tiny little eggs, hatching into tiny fry and now grown into their juvenile state. These do look more like platinum or even pearl Medaka rather than the duo colour variety that I was sold the eggs as, but I still like them and I think they're a really cool fish. Thankfully all the juveniles in here do seem to be doing really well, and there's 16 from my oldest batch of eggs and there's 5 from a younger batch which were a lot smaller. The tank also has a few ram's horn snails and 2 Armano shrimp in it now. A couple of weeks ago the female Armano shrimp released her babies into the tank, but they do require salinity to survive, so they didn't make it and she ended up eating a lot of her own babies a few hours later. I do plan to let this tank grow out a little bit more over the next month or so before posting a build video, but that should be online next month. This Littorella uniflora has been really impressive so far, and it's grown at a far faster pace than I ever expected, and it's sending out plenty of runners, and I'm curious if I get a full carpet out of it even though this is a low tech tank. Thankfully it is a native plant to northwest Europe, so it should be able to handle being in an unheated tank at room temperature with ease. So moving on to my 12-gallon golden white cloud mountain minnow tank, and everything's going really well in here now. I did replace 2 of the Anubias plants that melted away during the initial cycle, but overall the rest of of the plants do seem to be bouncing back and starting to thrive. I actually really like the way this tank's looking right now with the jungle aquascape look, with it being overgrown, but I am wanting to wait until the Hygrophilus siamensis 53B in the middle has grown out a lot more. I also swapped out the limnophila in this tank for some dwarf sage just to see how it fares, because I've never actually tried dwarf sage before and I do want to use it in some tanks next year. The Helanthium telenum green has bounced back after its initial melt stage, and it does seem to be doing really well, sending runners out in all directions, so again I'm hoping I get a nice full carpet over the coming months. The white clouds are really entertaining to watch, and they are constantly on the move, sparring for breeding rights and actually breeding, but the ram's horn snails in here have realised they can't eat the white cloud eggs once they touch the substrate, so I doubt I'll get any babies from this tank. The rocks in this tank were sold to me as Sirius stone, but this doesn't look right to my eye, as other Sirius stones have a very different appearance once submerged. I was a little worried that it might affect the water parameters in here, so I've been testing everything on a regular basis, and the only thing I can see is a slightly higher pH range, which I was expecting anyway. So moving on to my 7-gallon tank, and I was torn for weeks between clown killifish and celestial pearl danios. Eventually I just decided to check what Gateshead guppies had in stock, and I went through and got some CPDs to stock the tank. I initially planned to add between 6 and 8 CPDs due to the smaller tank size, but when I got there they did have a deal on for 10, so I bought 10 of them and I ended up getting one free, so I ended up with 11. Thankfully the water parameters are stable, but I will keep an eye on them, and I might upgrade this tank setup to a larger tank next year, but so far the CPDs seem fine and have settled in without issue. So moving on to my shrimp tanks, and starting with the Walstad cherry shrimp setup. This tank does have 2 adult Medaka in it right now, but I will probably transfer them over to the main Medaka tank once the fry are a little bit bigger, just to prevent the adults from eating them. As usual, the shrimp in here are breeding really well, and there's a few buried females and juvenile shrimp coming up. I will be giving a lot of these shrimp away over the coming weeks because some of my friends are getting new aquariums for Christmas, and I'm gradually converting them into shrimp fans. The pearlweed jungle tank is still going for now, but I will be rescaping this soon, as I've started a pearlweed jungle shrimp jar. I do love the look of these pearlweed jungles, but having a full tank where I can barely see the shrimp feels a bit excessive. There's at least one more buried female in this tank, so again I'm going to be expecting more Bloody Marys any week now. The first batch of babies from a couple of weeks ago are also grown at a decent rate too, and I haven't seen any issues in the tank. So moving on to my orange Neocaridina tank, and there's some good news for this one as well, because the orange Neocaridina are finally breeding and I managed to see some babies in here. That means that all 4 of my shrimp colonies are breeding now, so to celebrate I decided to treat myself to an early Christmas present and got myself a second rack to get more shrimp tanks going. I did have to trim the limnophila in here back quite a bit because it was starting to take over, so the tank does look a little rough for now, but everything else is going well. Moving on to my yellow Neocaridina tank, and these guys have been breeding like crazy again, so I will be giving some of these to friends as well once their new Christmas present tanks are cycled. I added some Vallisneria nana and Vallisneria asiatica to the tank to test them over the winter. Both of these varieties of Vallisneria are meant to be able to deal with cooler temperatures in unheated aquariums, so they should be fine at room temperature. Another potential benefit with nano tanks is that both of these varieties are meant to be on the shorter side as far as Vallisneria goes. The Eliocharis in here is finally starting to spread out and grow, but it's literally taken 6 months, so I am still going to class this as a failed test experiment, and I will be rescaping the tank next year. So just to touch on the new shrimp rack, and the top 2 shelves will be used for Walstad method shrimp tanks. I'm probably going to set the tanks up, let them age in, and then move the yellow Neocaridina into one and probably the Bloody Mary shrimp into the other, and then debuild their current tanks and rebuild them as Walstad shrimp tanks as well. The bottom shelf is for my shrimp jars, and I'll have a build video for this middle jar this coming month, but this new jar is my pearlweed jungle setup and it's only a couple of days old. I'm not actually sure about this third shelf yet, and I keep flip-flopping between another shrimp tank or getting more shrimp jars, but I really can't decide yet. Finally, we have the shrimp breeding tub that I set up a couple of weeks back, and I'll probably move this one into the space in the kitchen where I used to grow out my Medaka fry and keep this as a quarantine tank moving forward. I do like the idea of breeding breeding the highest possible grade of shrimp in something like this, but I also like setting up Walstad tanks, adding shrimp to it and letting them breed, leaving the low grades in there to just see what happens. I'm already having issues with getting rid of all my excess shrimp anyway, so I don't really want to breed high quality ones and then have a lot of them just sitting in this tub without being able to give them away or sell them. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Hopefully it was entertaining. Thanks for watching and have a good day.